Hey guys, this is Lala Legacy, and welcome back to another episode of Cachexia. Ugh, sorry, I had a hard time saying that word. Anyways, if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button because that would mean the whole world to me. And after this video, if you like it, hit that like button too. Alright, again, I am so sorry if you can hear banging. I'm pretty sure you can because they are very loud. But yeah, work is being done on the roof again. Alright, let's go. A lovely smell. Like herbs and flowers. Sweet, delicate, and earthy. As Esther slowly forced her eyelids open, that pleasant scent greeted her with the morning sun. She blinked around in confusion. This unfamiliar place. Was she dreaming? What kind of place had she awoken in? But as her mind dispelled its haze of sleep, the previous night's events came drifting back to her. The forest, the manor, Sienna. All of it was real. Esther dragged herself up into a sitting position, rubbing at her eyes with one hand. Then her gaze drifted down to the floor, where a small mug sat by her feet. Curious, she bent down to pick it up and realized she'd been smelling the fragrant tea inside. After one sip of the warm drink, she felt instantly refreshed. It was like filling her lungs with cool, crisp morning air, a restorative that washed through and cleansed her system. Is it really all right to ask her that? I don't want to push her, she just looks so tired. I don't know. A soft muttering caught Esther's attention. Glancing over her shoulder, she saw Sienna sweeping the floor with a thoughtful expression, lost in whatever she was contemplating. If only you didn't hate visitors, Papa. I really could have used your advice. Sienna shook her head, sighing wistfully. Oh, you're awake. Suddenly noticing Esther's gaze, she let out a soft gasp and hurried over to the couch, her features quickly brightening into a smile. With both her hands, Sienna clutched a broom that had to be twice her size, although she didn't look encumbered by it at all. Hello, Sienna. Thank you. Whoops. Thank you for the tea. Oh, it's nothing. I hope it hadn't gotten too cold. I can make a fresh pot if you'd like. It's fine. You don't have to do that. You don't like other people doing things for you, do you, Esther? I'm sorry, I'll try to be better about it. Esther averted her gaze, somewhat embarrassed by Sienna's keen observation and apology. Have you been cleaning since you got up? I didn't hear you at all. Clearing her throat, she swiftly changed the subject. Yes, I have. There's a lot to clean in this big, lovely house, so I need to do a little every morning and evening. You must clean really well. It's like there's a maid living here. Oh, really? A happy flush rose to Sienna's cheeks, and she bounced on her toes a little. Well, it's not a chore or anything. I love cleaning, actually. Papa worked really hard to repair this house and make it pretty. It was a lot easier to clean when he was here, though. Some of the rooms are still a little run down and I don't use them, so I don't dust those as much, but I try my best to take care of the others, even if it's not perfect. Her smile wilted slightly, as if she were disappointed in herself for not keeping the entire house pristine. It's still amazing. Even if I loved cleaning, I couldn't care for this whole place alone. Of course you could, Esther! Sienna responded without missing a beat, giving a determined nod and tapping her broom on the floor. Anyone could do anything. Anything they really want to do, that is. They just have to figure out what way is best for them. The other girl's confidence caught Esther off guard. She didn't seem to have a single cynical bone in her whole body. But anyway, I do hope you slept well. I'm sure you must have been very tired. I could see it in your eyes, they were so shadowed. A hint of concern crept into Sienna's voice as she studied Esther's face closely. You do look a little better today, though, not as gloomy. After you finish your tea, shall we go take care of the grounds together? If you're feeling up to it, I mean. I am, yes. And it's the least I could do to repay you. Esther! Sienna seemed like she was about to remind her there was no need to repay anything, and Esther was taking this all far too seriously. Esther was quite used to hearing that response, despite the fact that nobody ever seemed to really mean it. Whatever makes you the most happy, that's what a good hostess would say, I think. Just don't overwork yourself, alright? I feel like you're stubborn enough to keep going until you faint. Alright. After beaming at Esther encouragingly, Sienna hoisted her broom up and cleared her throat. Alright, I'll go finish sweeping the kitchen while you drink your tea. Then we'll go out. Oh, it's such a lovely day. I can't wait to show you around. Oh, I'm so excited. With a delighted sigh, she rushed over towards the kitchen, her broom swirling across the floor in a flurry of motion. What a peculiar girl she was. Maybe it was to be expected, considering she lived all alone for so long. Nobody was forcing her to try and fit in with society, or normal society. For that reason, Esther couldn't really get a grasp on her behavior or her personality. And that made her all the more curious about the story behind Sienna's unusual situation. After she finished her tea, Esther made her way to the manor's entrance. Sienna, who was already eagerly waiting for her, led the way out to the fresh morning air. God, this is gorgeous. As Esther's gaze drifted to the radiant blue sky, it almost felt like she'd been transported to a different forest. The dark, oppressive atmosphere of the previous night had vanished, transforming once more into a fairy tale shimmer. And with Sienna's company, the woods didn't seem quite so vast and daunting, or as lonely for that matter. All right, we're off to the well first. Reaching down beside the front door, Sienna picked up 2 buckets from beneath a protective cloth. Although both were decently sized, one was smaller and looked less professionally made, as if an amateur had crafted it. After a brief pause, Sienna held the larger bucket out to Esther. In that moment of hesitation, her gaze misted over with a distant look. Shall we? She reached out to take Esther's free hand with her own, holding it gently. It seemed like a subconscious movement, as if Sienna hadn't even realized she'd done it. The sudden warmth of those lightly calloused fingers caught Esther off guard. Normally, she always disliked being touched, but curiously enough, Sienna's delicate grasp didn't give her the same sense of discomfort. Yes, let's go. Sienna gave her a soft, contented smile, although it seemed more melancholy than usual. An unexpected sadness briefly tugged at Esther's chest, as she had the odd sense she'd glimpsed something she shouldn't have. Hand in hand, they wandered across the manor grounds, heading for the well out by the garden. Neither of them spoke. Only the sound of birdsong and their light footsteps in the leaves filled the air. It seemed strange for Sienna to be so quiet, but Esther was a little relieved too. She didn't feel any pressure to speak. Briefly, she wondered if Sienna had completely lost herself in thought, perhaps even forgetting Esther's presence. But, as if she could somehow read Esther's mind, Sienna glanced over towards her. The smile on her face had grown contented once more, those traces of sadness drying up beneath the warm sunlight. As they stepped up to the well, Sienna came to a halt. "I'll let you go first if you like." She turned to look at Esther expectantly, tilting her head to one side. Nodding, Esther turned towards the well, scanning over it hastily. It had to be quite simple, surely. All she needed was to tie the rope to the bucket. That was it, right? Surely she could just lower it down afterwards. She wasn't very good at tying knots, though. What if it couldn't hold the water's weight as she lost Sienna's bucket down the well? Esther realized the other girl was watching her closely, eyes widening in realization. "Have you ever drawn water from a well, Esther?" Stricken with a sudden sense of self-consciousness, Esther shook her head. It seemed like such a basic thing to do, and yet she never really had the chance. "Really? But how do you get water?" "We have a water pump. The servants are normally the ones who use it." As Esther spoke, she started feeling more and more sheepish. Talking about servants made her sound so privileged and haughty. She hoped Sienna wouldn't think less of her for it. "Ah, so the water comes right to you, and you have servants fetch it so you don't even have to do any work? That sounds amazing! You must be something like a princess or a noble." She studied Sienna for a moment, trying to tell if she was being teased. But the other girl just peered up at her with wonder and curiosity, her gaze sparkling excitedly. "I'm not a princess. A lot of people in my city have servants. We only keep a few, but some families have dozens." "Dozens?" As if trying to imagine such a thing, Sienna closed her eyes, letting out an envious sigh. "There must be so much more to the city than what Papa told me. It's like another world or something, isn't it?" For some reason, that thought made Esther feel a little crestfallen. "Well, even if you were a princess, I don't think it would matter." Her focus returning to Esther, Sienna put on a bright, confident smile. Like she'd suddenly come to a realization about something. "As long as I know where you come from and you know where I come from, we should be able to understand each other easily, right? And it makes me really happy to hear about your home, even if I know I'll never fit in there." The warmth of Sienna's smile was contagious. Even if she doubted the other girl's words, they put Esther slightly more at ease. Sienna didn't seem like she'd ever judge her for not knowing something. "I don't think you'd like the city, since it's not a very nice place, but it's all I've ever known." "Oh, I'm sure it can't be that bad. Both you and Papa come from the cities after all, so there have to be some good people there." She punctuated her words with a confident nod, unfazed by Esther's hesitance. "Anyways, shall we fetch some water? I'll go first so I can show you the best way to tie a knot. Here, just like this." Esther watched as Sienna secured the rope to her bucket, lowering it down with the winch until it splashed into the water. Afterwards, when she mimicked Sienna's knot with her own, larger bucket, Esther felt a wave of relief when it managed to make the return journey. Her smaller companions seemed thrilled too, even if it was just an unremarkable feat. Perhaps she was just excited to impart her knowledge. Buckets in hand, they set off towards the gardens, water cheerfully splashing with each step. Despite Sienna's small frame, she carried her full bucket with little effort. Years of solitary labor must have given her strength that belied her size. Esther felt her arms already getting slightly sore from the heavy weight, but she made a determined effort not to show any trace of discomfort in front of Sienna. Here we are, Esther! My garden, what do you think? As they came to a stop among the rows of neatly planted crops, Sienna swiveled around to look up at Esther eagerly. I can't believe you do all of this alone. It's so pretty and well kept. You really think so? Esther nodded, her gaze drifting across the diverse, meticulously cared for vegetables and leafy greens with admiration. Well, actually, Papa was the one who made the first garden patch here. He wanted to live off what he could grow and forage for himself, because he hated relying on other people. I only saw him visit the city a few times a year. He taught me how to do everything by myself too. Well, not everything, but he did write an almanac and a foraging book, and he made them really easy to understand just for me. So as long as the earth is still alive, I know I'll be all right. Humming contentedly to herself, Sienna led the way over to a large watering can that sat near a row of peas. Once she'd emptied her bucket into the can, she traded the empty vessel with Esther, a convenient way to hold plucked weeds. Luckily for Esther, weeding wasn't a task that needed much instruction. It didn't take long for them to settle into a comfortable pace together, with Sienna watering and fussing over her crops while Esther pulled out unwanted sprouts. Although gardening had never really appealed to her before, it surprised Esther how relaxing it was to work with her hands like this. Working side by side helped diminish the awkwardness that still lingered between them, as well, and before long, Esther felt comfortable enough to break the silence with the question. Do you ever get nervous when it grows colder? In case there isn't enough food to last you until spring, I mean. Oh, no, not really. Some plants grow all the way through winter, and things like potatoes will last for a while in my pantry. You could dry out berries and mushrooms, and nuts are always good too. There are a lot growing around here, so I never run out of those. Motioning towards some shrubs at the edge of the clearing, Sienna hefted her watering can with a light grunt before she continued. Actually, I think it's quite fun when a new season comes along. It means I can plant new foods and make new recipes. I'd really miss winter if it never came, even if the house does get icy cold. Icy cold? Isn't it cozy by the fireplace as long as you're covered in blankets? It's a little bit drafty still, but with some hot tea it's perfect. Oh, that reminds me. I have to show you my winter recipe book sometime. I'm making a new spring one, since I've been trying a lot of different things, and there are really so many amazing combinations you can have with just... With a small smile warming her face, Esther listened as Sienna began recounting tales of her recent cooking and foraging adventures. It felt so calm and comfortable somehow. Perhaps Sienna had noticed how little Esther liked to speak, so instead of asking too many questions, she lightly chattered away about lettuce and peas, her voice filling the silence like the bubbling of a stream. After they'd finished weeding and watering, they brought their empty pails and a few small towels to venture outside the clearing. Eager to share her knowledge, Sienna guided Esther to the best foraging spot she'd found, pointing out which berries, nuts, and wild greens were best to gather. The more that Esther learned, the less harsh and daunting the forest appeared. Surviving in the wild always struck her as a daunting task, but Sienna's simple, cheerful explanation made it seem like something anyone could accomplish, as long as they put in enough effort. None of this seemed like work for Sienna either. It was almost like they were just playing together instead. Esther couldn't help but envy her energy and enthusiasm, the way she managed to take so much joy from everything. And yet, at certain moments, there was something unusually determined and purposeful about her effervescent happiness. As if it were another method of survival, just like her gardening or foraging was. The sun is so bright today. Oh, look! It's already a bit past midday. Time's been flying much faster than it normally does. All this work made me really hungry. Are you hungry, Esther? A little bit. She forced her words to sound nonchalant, but in reality, Esther was just as famished. Normally, she had to force herself to eat or simply forgot about it at all, but not today. Is that your stomach growling? No, it was probably just the wind. Oh, all right then. Well, if you wait for me on the little log near the garden, I'll bring back some food for us. I'll just be a few minutes, I promise. Meet you there. Twirling around, she bounded off in the direction of the manor, her hair fluttering wildly in the wind. Her constant energy never failed to amaze Esther. Already, she could feel a familiar deep fatigue weighing on her shoulders, as much as Sienna's presence helped distract her from it. But she was determined not to succumb to the feeling today. There was too much left for her to do. Oh, she's gonna pay for it later, though. Following Sienna's footsteps back towards the clearing, Esther made her way towards the fallen log near the garden patch. Before long, Sienna's small figure trotted back into view, a little splash of white and pink flitting across the grass. After stopping briefly at the well, she approached Esther's chosen picnic spot with careful steps, balancing 2 bowls on one arm whilst carrying a bucket of fresh water in the other. Here we are! I just made something small and quick, but it should give us enough energy to finish today's chores. Beaming proudly, she offered Esther one of the bowls. It held a hearty salad topped with lentils and various seeds, a red berry glaze glistening on the leaves. Tucked into each bowl was a generous slice of warm bread, lightly toasted from the stove. Thank you. It looks delicious. It's really nothing. But my baby lettuces will be happy to hear that. They always like a bit of encouragement. You talk to your lettuces? I usually chatter with all of my plants. They were the only friends I really had before you came here. With that slightly quieter, more subdued statement, Sienna settled down beside her on the log. At first, Esther felt slightly awkward, caught in the wake of Sienna's earnest words with no idea how to reply. But once the smaller girl took a bite of salad and started to munch away, Esther followed suit, her mood instantly lifting from the sweet berry flavor that filled her mouth. They took turns using a ladle to sip the water Sienna brought, its crisp coolness as refreshing as the morning breeze. Although they didn't exchange any words while eating, the atmosphere between them gradually settled into something calm and comfortable. Now and then, Sienna would glance over at Esther, offering a little smile as soon as they made eye contact. She seemed happy just to be able to share a meal together. In a way, Esther could understand why. Normally, she preferred to eat alone. Other people made her feel self-conscious about her shyness or the way she ate her food. But somehow, Sienna's quiet company didn't bother her. Now that they were a little more familiar with each other, perhaps the other girl didn't feel like she needed to constantly fill the silence all the time. Once they'd finished eating, the two girls made a brief return to the manor. Despite Sienna's protests, Esther stubbornly insisted on washing up their dishes. Her pride refused to let the younger girl handle everything, even if Sienna was probably far more capable at it. Oh my god, the more we get into this, the more that, I'm just thinking to myself, Esther is literally me. Here you are, Esther! They reunited outside. Sienna handed her a large, sturdy broom, even bigger than the one she'd been using earlier. Just like with the buckets, she held a second broom that was smaller and much more suited to her size. The broom was far heavier than Esther expected. It had the slightly dusty, preserved look of something that had sat unused for years, but hadn't been forgotten. I know we've already done a lot today, so if you need to rest, just tell me, please. Thank you. But I'm fine. I could keep working. All right, but you can always stop whenever you need to. Through Sienna's gentle smile, Esther thought she could detect a hint of worry. It was more than a little unexpected, considering they'd only just met each other yesterday. The place we're heading is a few minutes' walk from the manor. Let's go, shall we? Motioning for Esther to follow, Sienna set off eagerly into the woods. Her excitement must have hastened her steps, for Esther suddenly had trouble keeping up with her lively pace. They hurried along a slender, winding path, and the manor's statuesque presence soon disappeared among the branches. Once it did, Esther found herself swiftly losing all sense of direction among the sea of vibrant leaves. She was thoroughly glad she had Sienna to guide her. Otherwise, it seemed unlikely she'd ever find her way back. Here we are! A short while later, they emerged into a less densely wooded area. At first, Esther thought she was imagining things. But when she looked more closely, she realized she was seeing exactly what she thought. A serene, beautiful graveyard, captured in the golden sunlight like a forgotten relic lost to time. Rows upon rows of headstones stood between the trees, each one a different shape and size. But despite their obvious age and the fact that they were nestled in the woods instead of a proper clearing, every grave looked incredibly clean. It gave the cemetery a strange, ethereal atmosphere, with the same awe and reverence that surrounded mythical artifacts in a museum. Not far in the distance, a large mausoleum rose upon the shore of the graveyard's pond, casting a somber reflection across the water. It caught Esther's eye, and for a moment, she found herself mesmerized by its towering presence. Are you looking at the mausoleum? It's locked, I'm afraid. I've looked all over the manor and the grounds, but I don't think I'll ever find the key. Papa must have lost it. Sienna offered a small, wistful smile, shaking her head. Esther pulled her focus back to the other girl, blinking. It felt like something strange had come over her briefly, but she had no idea what it was. Why do you tend to this place so closely? Is anyone you know buried here? No, I don't know any of them. To Esther's surprise, Sienna shook her head. It seemed far too insensitive to ask where Sienna's father was buried if he wasn't in the graveyard, so Esther bit her lip and let the other girl continue. Actually, I don't really know who's buried here. Papa never gave me much of an answer. But since this manor belonged to his family, the cemetery is probably for old relatives. All of the graves seem like they've been here for a very long time. As her gaze drifted across the headstone, Sienna's expression grew a little more distant again. I don't know why, but I've always been drawn here ever since I was a little girl. It feels so peaceful, lonely but peaceful, and comforting in a strange way. Like a place that will always be here, always the same, as long as I take care of it. Her words trailed off slowly, ending in little more than a whisper that faded into the breeze. But only a few lingering seconds passed before Sienna seemed to catch herself, blinking and restoring a brighter smile to her face. Well, let me show you what I usually do here. It's an easy chore and very calming. I think you'll like it. It was impossible to just ignore the brief moments that came over Sienna, where it seemed like she wasn't aware of Esther's presence at all. But then again, after being alone for so long, it was only natural that she'd fall back into her own thoughts now and then. I'm ready. With these brooms, sweeping is involved somehow, I assume. It is! What a clever guess! Come, come! I always start over here in the northwest patch. Gently taking Esther's hand, Sienna led her over to the first row of graves. She demonstrated how she cleared each headstone of stray leaves and surrounding weeds, and once or twice a week, picked little bunches of flowers to rest beside the markers. Like Sienna had said before, the task was easy and calming. Despite her initial hesitance, Esther soon found herself enjoying how peaceful the cemetery felt, and honoring the dead certainly seemed like a worthwhile effort. Yet, despite the soothing lull in thoughts it afforded her, and the secluded beauty that surrounded them, Esther couldn't shake a sense of uneasiness that tingled at the nape of her neck. A sense that they were not alone in the cemetery. It was completely irrational, and she couldn't explain it no matter how hard she tried. But even in the daytime, with the sun's gentle afternoon rays filtering through the trees, something about the graveyard's shadow struck her as peculiarly haunting. As evening began to settle over the forest, the two girls made their way back to the manor. Despite her tiredness, Esther's heart leapt at the prospect of finally beginning her research once they arrived. And, true to her promise, Sienna took Esther straight up to her father's study. By the time they arrived, however, the towering bookshelves blocked out most of the remaining sunlight, so they had to go fetch a few candles to alleviate the gloom. According to Sienna, she used such light sources sparingly, and non-wood fuel was difficult to stockpile. Luckily, there were a few types of shrubs and trees in the forest that she could extract wax from, as well as seeds and nuts that could be crushed for oil. But since Esther was a special guest, Sienna reassured her that she could light as many candles as she needed during her stay. It feels like so long since I've seen any candlelight in this room. Well, it has been quite long, I suppose. The last time was when Papa was still around. Setting a newly lit candle down on the desk, Sienna let out a quiet sigh. Sienna, your father. I've been meaning to ask. What was his name? Oh, his name was, sorry, I always have a hard time with this name. Isaiah? It's so strange to say it out loud since I never called him that. I only heard someone use his name once, back when I was very small. She fiddled with the hem of her dress, her gaze drifting away from Esther's. Or is it Isaiah? I don't know. I've heard it both ways, so I don't know. I'm sorry about the mess in here. All these loose papers will probably make it hard for you to find what you're looking for. Papa never liked to throw things away, especially not his letters, not even his little scribbles or notes. You can read any of them you like, but Well, Papa always told me not to peep at his writings, so even now I try to leave them as they are. You'll probably think I'm very silly for it, I'm sure. I can help you with anything else, though. Would you like me to sort out the books, maybe? No, it's all right. You've been very kind to me already. I don't want to push you any further. Her words were quiet and gentle but firm. She didn't want to take advantage of Sienna's generosity. And although she never mentioned it directly, Esther also needed some time alone. All right then, I'll leave it to you. If you need me, I'll be in the kitchen fixing up dinner. You can come down whenever you're ready. Beaming at Esther encouragingly, she turned towards the door, lifting her hand in a little wave. Good luck! Thank you. As Sienna's presence faded away, the study's atmosphere steadily began to shift. A dark, grim cloud of memory seemed to hang over the room, specters of unending nights and restless sleep. Although Esther couldn't pinpoint exactly why, she had the distinct sense that this chamber belonged to a deeply troubled mind. Clutching a candle in one hand, she started to scan through the shelves, her eyes flickering across numerous titles. Sienna was right. Her father really had collected a staggering assortment of books. But as she glanced over the various titles before her, Esther noticed something unusual. Despite, Isaiah... Yeah, it's Isaiah, isn't it? Yeah. Sorry, I'm not good with names. Especially ones that could be pronounced, like, differently, like, Stefan and, like, Steven. Like, how Stefan is written, you can also pronounce it as Steven. I have a hard time with names like those, and Isaiah is one of them. Because I've heard it as Isaiah, or as, like, Isaiah or Isaiah as well. And, yeah, it's just, my brain! I'm bad with names. Despite Isaiah's our obvious focus on alchemy, there seem to be almost as many books on ghosts and spirits and a number of treatises on the on the supernatural. Were they related to his search for a cure at all? Or was there some other reason for his apparent obsession? Esther couldn't understand how ghosts might be related to the Pale, so maybe he'd simply found them interesting to research. Still, the anomaly struck out in her mind, leaving her with a nagging sense of questions. As she opened up a large book on biology, suddenly a loose leaf of parchment fluttered out. Esther bent down to pick it up, turning the aged paper over in her hands. It looked like a journal entry, but there was no date to be found. Curiously squinting at the messy script, Esther brought it over to the nearest lamp and began to read. "7 days have passed since Amaranth left me. 3 days since Jeremiah told me he saw her with another man, her previous husband, now miraculously returned from his absence. I cannot eat, I cannot sleep. My heart bounds with manic energy between rage and this crushing sense of abandonment. In the depths of my darkest moods, I look back on the long months of her pregnancy, months that I spent on carpentry, furnishing, cleaning, planting, remaking this dusty tomb of an estate into a family manor. All for her, all because she could never stand life in the dreadful city. And where is she now? Back in his chambers, no doubt, embracing him in the darkness so that she might hide the shameful stretch marks of her maternity. Damn her, that psychopathic wretch. Damn her and her lecherous, adulterous bastard of a husband. Oh, how I used to wonder what such a beautiful soul as her might have seen in a waste of flesh like him. But now with the veil lifted from my eyes, I finally understand. They are alike, two souls perfectly matched in their shallowness and fickle attentions. What a ridiculous fool I was, ever believing that she might come to truly care for a penniless researcher, one with nothing to offer her but himself. And now, what am I left with? A small child and no mother to raise it. An old family home and no family to fill its many chambers. A retirement from my life in medicine without anything worthy left to retire for. No, I refuse. I refuse to let her triumph over me. I will remain here, away from that toxic conurbation, isolated among the fruits of my sweat and labor. With these foundations I have laid in the land, I know I could survive solely by myself, without recourse to the city's indulgent pleasures. I'm having a hard time speaking, apparently. Here, amidst my tomes and papers, I will press onward in my research, towards the last and most important focus of my life. A cure for this disease. And as for the little girl, we look nothing alike, she and I. Indeed, now that I am privy to her mother's treachery, I suspect her father may be another man entirely. The little hairs on her head are purely golden, and everything from her eyes to her lips is nothing but a bitter replica of that woman's features. She even has this self-same twinkling, uncaring laugh, as if the world could never touch her nor dare to make her cry. The very thought irritates me to no end. I cannot bear the sight of her, an unending reminder of the future that was stolen from me. Thus I am resolved. I will take the girl to the city and leave her in the hands of the orphanage there. A less cruel fate, no doubt, than to remain forever imprisoned with an unloving father. In the end, I know I could never truly amount to anything more for her. As Esther's eyes drifted across the page's last words, she felt a strange, uncomfortable sense of guilt in her chest. The girl he was talking about, he had to have meant Sienna. Did he really feel so bitterly towards her? Obviously, Isaiah hadn't taken his daughter to an orphanage, but his resentment of her sounded deep-rooted. It felt invasive and overly intimate to be reading his private thoughts, but did she really have much choice if there was any chance Isaiah's writings hinted at a cure? She had to go through everything, including his journals, in case he mentioned any important research. Otherwise, there was a very good chance that she'd miss something. Tucking the journal page away, she hastily pushed the book back into its shelf. Now she was even more glad that she decided to search alone. Some parts of the past were better off remaining buried, it seemed. Attempting to banish the journal page from her mind, Esther combed through a few stacks of papers and books lying around the study, scanning through them in an attempt to glean any useful information. But her exhaustion from the day's work, along with the esoteric, erudite nature of Isaiah's research, made it increasingly difficult to concentrate. Perhaps she was better off returning the next day, when presumably she'd have more energy to scan over things. Leaving the study with a faint sense of disappointment, Esther made her way down to the kitchen where she could hear Sienna working happily away. She'd prepared a rich, hearty vegetable stew for their supper, and a delicious pot of tea to accompany it. As night fell, they shared their meal at the little kitchen table, warmed by a nearby cozy hearth. Unlike their quiet lunch, Sienna kept up a lively, mostly one-sided conversation all the while, as if she suddenly thought of 100 more things to say in Esther's absence. Still, it felt so comfortable somehow. The normal pressures of acting sociable didn't seem to apply around Sienna, who seemed content just to share Esther's presence, even if the older girl rarely spoke. A peace Esther had only felt before when she was alone. How unfamiliar it all was. But that is where I'm gonna stop this episode. Yeah, if you like it, hit that like button down below. I am loving this game so much. I love how Esther is so much like me. And I'm sorry for getting Isaiah's name wrong, possibly, in the first time that I said it. But here we are. Anyways, thank you guys so much. Don't forget to subscribe, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!